She was rejected because of her color. Then a millionaire farmer claimed her heart. She stood at the edge of a dusty dirt road, clutching a worn leather suitcase. The letter she had carried across miles promised her a new beginning, a husband, and a place to belong. But when the door opened and her future in-laws laid eyes on her, the promise shattered instantly. She was not rejected for her character nor for her spirit, but simply for the color of her skin. Humiliated and abandoned, she prepared to walk away into uncertainty. Yet destiny had other plans. A wealthy farmer, watching from a distance, would step into her life, challenging prejudice and forever changing the story they thought they controlled. In the late 1800s, America's frontier towns were filled with dreams of expansion, prosperity, and new beginnings. Mail-order brides became a bridge between isolated settlers and distant women hoping for security, companionship, or even escape. For many, these arrangements offered a chance at survival. Among those women was Elise, a young black woman with eyes full of determination and a heart unbroken by hardship. She had grown up in a world where opportunity was often stolen before it ever reached her. Yet when she answered the advertisement of a farmer seeking a wife, she saw it as a doorway to stability and hope. She dressed carefully for the journey, wearing a cream-colored dress that whispered dignity, and carried a single suitcase that held her past and her future. When she arrived at the wooden homestead, her pulse quickened with cautious optimism. But instead of welcome, she was met with silence that burned colder than rejection itself. The farmer's family looked at her with narrowed eyes, their judgment piercing before a word was spoken. Whispers turned to blunt refusal. She was told she did not belong, that her presence would bring shame, that her skin was a barrier no promise could break. Elise stood still, her dreams unraveling. Her suitcase heavy not with belongings, but with the weight of prejudice. What she did not know was that someone else, standing at the edge of that homestead, had been watching everything unfold. His gaze lingered not on her skin, but on the courage she carried, and it would alter the path of her story forever. Elise walked down the dirt road with steady steps, though her heart was breaking. Each stride was an act of defiance against the voices that had told her she was unworthy. The suitcase she carried wasn't just heavy, it was symbolic of every rejection, every slight, every insult she had endured simply because of who she was. In that moment of despair, the world seemed silent, save for the crunch of gravel beneath her shoes. But footsteps approached from behind. A tall man, broad-shouldered and carrying an axe from his morning work, called out to her. His name was Thomas Hale, one of the wealthiest farmers in the county. Unlike most men, his fortune had not hardened him but sharpened his awareness of how injustice was sown into the soil they tilled. Thomas had seen what had happened. He had witnessed her dignity in the face of cruelty, the way she refused to cry in front of those who turned her away. In his mind, her worth was undeniable, not despite her color, but in her unshakable strength. The town, however, was less forgiving. When whispers spread that a wealthy landowner had taken interest in the woman others rejected, anger simmered. Neighbors questioned his choices, warning him that his farm would lose respect, that his reputation would crumble. Elise herself felt the burden of these whispers. She had come searching for acceptance, not to become the center of a storm. Yet as the days passed, Thomas offered her small acts of kindness, a seat at his table, a space in his home, and dignity where others had only offered scorn. Elise, though cautious, began to feel something she had nearly lost: belonging. The couple's bond grew in the quiet moments, walking the fields at sunset, sharing stories of resilience, and discovering that their struggles, though different, had forged a common strength. But the prejudice of the town was not silent. The more their connection blossomed, the louder the opposition became. Some farmers refused to trade with Thomas. Others threatened to boycott his crops. And still, Elise faced stares that cut deep, as if every glance was a reminder that the world would not allow her happiness without a fight. It was a rising tide of tension that neither could ignore, forcing them to choose between surrendering to societal pressures or standing together against the storm. The breaking point came during a town gathering. During this harvest celebration, families, farmers, and traders filled the square with music and chatter. Elise, encouraged by Thomas, walked beside him into the crowd. Silence fell almost instantly. The music faltered, the laughter dimmed, and all eyes turned toward them. It was a test, unspoken yet undeniable. Would they bow their heads and retreat, or would they stand as equals in a place that refused to see them that way? A group of men, emboldened by the crowd, confronted Thomas. They accused him of betraying tradition, of tainting the purity of their community. They demanded that Elise leave, claiming she had no right to walk among them. For a moment, Elise felt the old, familiar sting of rejection. But this time she was not alone. Thomas stepped forward, his voice steady but fierce. He reminded the crowd that the land they stood on was built by many hands, some of whom were never given credit because of the same prejudice now on display. He declared that Elise's worth was not theirs to measure, and that love was not dictated by color, but by character. The crowd murmured, some in agreement, many in disapproval. But the declaration could not be undone. Elise stood tall beside him, no longer the rejected bride with a suitcase. Still, a woman claimed not by possession, but by recognition of her dignity. The night ended with division, but also with a shift. A crack in the wall of prejudice had formed, and though small, it was undeniable. In the days that followed, life did not magically transform. The whispers did not vanish, nor did prejudice dissolve overnight. But Elise and Thomas stood resolute, planting not only crops in the soil, but seeds of change in the minds of those who had doubted them. Slowly, neighbors who had turned away returned, some driven by necessity, others by the quiet realization that the strength of their love was not a threat but a lesson. Children, too young to carry the full weight of hate, began to greet Elise with smiles instead of stares. For Elise, the journey from rejection to belonging became more than her personal story. It became a symbol of resistance. She had arrived at that homestead expecting to be a wife by arrangement. However, instead, she became a partner by choice, and her dignity became a mirror to a community still learning to see. Thomas's farm prospered, not because he yielded to the town's pressures, but because he built it on fairness, resilience, and unity. Together, they embodied a truth larger than themselves, that love rooted in respect can withstand storms of prejudice. And as Elise looked back on the day she first stood at the door with her suitcase, she realized something profound. That rejection, painful as it was, had guided her toward a love that did not see her as less, but as equal, something priceless that no society could strip away. Her story whispers to us still, how many lives, how many loves have been denied because of a prejudice that blinds us? And how many more could bloom if we chose to see with clearer eyes? The answer, as Elise's journey shows, is not found in silence, but in courage. A courage to claim what is just and to love beyond the barriers others try to build.